St.Joseph College of Engineering. Our department and our college is started in the year of 1994 with the 4 branches, and it is accredited from since 2003 onwards. And our department got gold medal during last year, and many more laurels brought by our students. One of such alumni is Gautham Pasupuleti. Is going to deliver today's webinar. Since he is owning his own lab. And about the college, it is accredited with the A+ grade with the highest points like 3.46 out of 4 scale. And it is 160th NIRF ranking out of 1071 applied institutions all over India, including IITs and NITs and other private universities also. It is running in successfully with a 26th year with 10 departments, 10 UG departments and 6 PG departments. And about the department, it is a very old department in our college since college started. This branch, there is instrumentation control engineering also started. It is accredited from 2003 onwards. The main positive point about the department is 50%, more than 50% of the faculty is holding doctorate degrees. Also, we have well-equipped lab. We are conducting the webinar and other activities in a continuous manner by using ISA, that is Instrumentation Society of Automation Society, with the help of the management and everyone. We are conducting the webinar in a successful manner. So today we are going to have the presentation in Biodesign topic, which is hosted by or given by Gautham Pasupuleti, and CEO and Managing Director. He established this Biodesign Innovation Lab during 2017. Actually, he is passed out in the year of 2014 from our college and department. Within 3 years of span of time, he can able to start a lab, and successfully he is running the lab with 4 years. Now he is distributing ventilators to all over the country to meet the current requirements of COVID-19. So Gautham, I am welcoming you. So now please take over the session for this webinar. Gautham.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gautham Pasupuleti from Biodesign Innovation Labs and the CEO and Managing Director. So we started this company, Biodesign Innovation Labs, in 2017. The genesis of starting this company, it mainly began when we started looking at how we could solve the clinical need, how we can solve the unmet clinical need at hospitals, which we visited across in India. So in 2017, in Tamil Nadu, in other area, and we found there was a huge shortage of ventilators, and existing cost of ventilators were very high. And that's how we got to know the clinical problem statements and what are the existing state-of-the-art of facilities which are available in the hospitals. And we tried to design and develop solutions that were actually solving these problems. So we came up with the process of medical device innovations in a way that we found a problem and we designed solution which is solving a particular need, and that specific problem is being designed and developed a medical device that can have a huge impact on our society. So we're looking at developing devices, and I wanted to be explaining what is the process that it takes to develop a medical device and do something which is innovative, something the market is in need of, something the patient is in need of. So I'll be so as part of our company, we make portable ventilators, respiratory support devices, intensive care products. And right now we are working for the COVID situation. We're trying to supply it across hospitals in India, working with the government, working with the NGOs and other partners in supplying the product. So, but I want to make sure that the process of development of medical device, it takes its own period of time, and so the innovation that comes out of the end of the development is something that you should know the process, how to innovate and how to take it to the market. So I'll be quickly going through some of the few things which is involved in process of medical device development. So the first thing is, if you look at the overview of any particular medical device innovations, so there are specific ways that you develop. So you first identify the problem by looking at a diverse team of engineers, doctors, and researchers forming a group, and they are visiting some hospitals across a specific region, say hospitals in Delhi, hospitals in Tamil Nadu. They're visiting and they're trying to find the problems. So you are basically identifying problem, and then you are trying to do an analysis of what is the need, and you found a lot of needs are there, and you are doing a need screening, and then you are coming up with a concept and concept generation, and then you select a particular concept, and then you develop the product, and then you plan it to launch it to the market. So the process of medical device, innovating a medical device involves all these steps. And if you look at any particular medical device, there's always an iteration, and there is a different phase of development. So if you look at the phases, one is the identify phase, where you do the need finding and you do the need screening, and then you try to develop it, which is where the invention, the patents, and the IP filing comes in, because you are coming up with a very new, unique idea, and then you come up with the product which is going to go to the market for the particular patient's need or a clinical need. So if you look at the process of innovation, I'm going to be explaining with specific examples. So whenever a product is being developed, you look at what is the market opportunity. For example, if you look at the current situation, COVID, so there could be different. There is a huge pandemic, and there is a different kinds of problems that you would look at, being infection control or ventilator support, or be it other problems like sanitization and so on. So you see the point of where you apply the design for a particular market opportunity, and then you do the design thinking process, and you develop according to the business needs. So one of the things is you understand the complete picture of what are the innovation that is happening in the existing market, and then you see what is the competition, and you develop solutions according to that. So the market is right now, if you look at the respiratory market, the market is pretty much crowded. So you have to be a good differentiator with the product that you're coming up with, and then the differentiation would essentially be involved during the process of development. You identify the problems which are not being solved by others, and then you come up with a solution, and that's where your differentiation lies. So most part, the principle is that we try to do something which is improving the patient's lives. And whenever you are developing any innovation, you should always make sure that you are sticking to the needs of the patients, and then you make the solution which is completely patient-centric. And the other thing is the implementation of that idea and then acceptance by others. It only matters as long as it is something patient friendly. It is something patient required ones. So so if there is no implementation of the concept idea, that might not be a concept or an idea. So an idea itself is not very important thing, but the process that you involve in making the product and then the time that it takes to develop the product is very much important. So one of the things is that, so there is nothing more critical in the innovation process than putting the patient's need first. So if you look at a patient with pneumonia, and patient with pneumonia has a specific condition where their alveoli is being affected by this virus. So you give a virus or a bacteria. So you give antibiotics or you give antivirals, and so there are different kinds of treatment given for a patient with pneumonia. If it is a patient, children under 5, we give antibiotics and we give a respiratory support, oxygen therapy. If the patient doesn't respond to the treatment, you go on with next phase of treatment like intubation and sedation. So similarly, so when you develop something, it has to solve the existing state-of-the-art treatment process or a diagnostics or any particular screening methodology. And say if you're taking a diabetes, so diabetes, there could be existing invasive mode of like taking the blood and doing the analysis. So if you come up with something different, non-invasive, if you come up with something which is totally different from the existing state of the art, so that is something, an innovative process that you're looking at. So the whole process itself is very important when you identify what exactly you're trying to solve and how are you trying to solve, how is it different from other products which are already in the market. So so the innovating is a process when you look at the product development. So the key thing that you need to remember is when you are developing a product, you will have a lot of issues in terms of regulatory, in terms of the market, in terms of the business models, in terms of the patent strategy, IP protection, and you'll have to go to clinical trials, and you'll have to do a team formation for you to develop the product and take it to market. So it's not a consumer product that you are developing and then you are taking it. Its own a particular process of development. It has to follow certain guidelines, regulatory guidelines, and standards, and you need to have a manufacturing practice in order to be launching into market. So a lot of things need to come into play when you're developing a medical device. And essentially, when you're innovating a medical device, you are making sure that it is something totally different than the existing state of the art, and it is not just an incremental innovation, incremental changes, but it is something exponential than what is already there, and how it is going to save patients' lives, or it is going to improve patients' lives. That is the way that you should be looking at what are the particular specifications and features that you're adding into the product that is going to impact patient. So the first thing about the need identification is strategic focus, observation and problem identification, and need statement development. So strategic focus, if you look at patients who has some kind of a cardiac problems, or patients who has some kind of a diabetes. So in our day-to-day life, we would be looking at what are the different things that patients are being affected with different problems. So if you look at top mortality rate, so there is a respiratory illnesses, cardiac problems, and other problems. So you look at the top problems and you see what is that you personally are inclined to solve a problem. So you personally might have some experience with someone, some of your family members or relatives have certain medical condition, and you want to solve a problem. So that could be your a personal inclination to solve a problem, and then you look at your strengths and weaknesses. What can you do, what you cannot do, and what is your strengthness. So you focus on your strengthness, and you find your team members to focus on your weaknesses, and then you find your outsourcing and other things to take care of the other things. So acceptance criteria is basically you understand what are the things that that you would want to know in order to develop a medical device. So you try to make sure that that whatever you are developing is solving a problem. For example, if a patient has a certain condition, say there is an engineer with a needle phobic mother decides to design an alternative method for administering the daily insulin she takes to control her diabetes. So this could be a strategic focus example. For example, there is an existing state-of-the-art treatment solution, and that has a pain point involved in it. And how are you going to do it in an alternative way that solves the problem, and it is also benefiting the patient? It is also the benefit of the patient is creating a market opportunity, and this market opportunity is helping the product grow, and it is going to capture the market. So these are some of the examples where you are looking at different examples where a user, where an inventor is coming across certain kind of a problem, and he is developing the solution because he has come up with this problem in his own life. So for example, a resident studying oncology becomes passionate about understanding the disease and commits to himself in cancer research and the pursuit of a cure. In my case, the product that we have developed, it started with when we identified problems which were mainly related to intensive care and emergency care. When we saw patients who are almost dying in emergency wards and ICU wards because lack of ventilators, or because the state of the standard of the treatment is such that they were not able to provide effective treatment. So a lot of things inspire us to develop solutions, and one of the things was that you come across different problems like cardiac related problems or respiratory problems, and you try to focus on those problems and how you could solve that through a product that you are coming up with innovation. So the other things could be identifying strengths and weaknesses. In order for you to do this, you will have to look at what is your core capabilities, which is in terms of are you a product designer, are you a electronics engineer, and what can you contribute to the product development. So you focus on your core key skills, and you try to acquire through your team members or other partners or outsourcing to get the other skills. So that is what is about you identify, so you exactly know what you can do, what you cannot do, and you can tie up with the team members, tie up with your professors and other people to get those things done. For example, you could do a electronics PCB design. So you would want to do you would want some of your friends to help you with or professors to help you with some design process of the ID industrial design. So the acceptance criteria is basically what is the identification of a mission and the evaluation of strengths and weaknesses or direct inputs. So you are looking at acceptance criteria, that is basically you are trying to solve a problem in the respiratory care or in the cardiac care, and you are taking the inputs of that and you are adding that into your whole design process. So some of the things are the market dynamics. So even if you wanted to solve this problem, is the problem so big enough that you could develop something and it can quickly capture the market? And is there a competition for that? If there is a competition, how are you going to overcome the competition, and what is the percentage of market that you're going to capture? And these are some of the things that you should look into before jumping into the product, whether the product that you're going to develop, the concept that you're going to generate, is it something the market is going to accept? Is it something that you have the resources required to achieve? Do you have the time to require to achieve? So all these things are like the checklist that you need to keep in check. So you'll have to understand the different aspects of these. For example, what would be the market size, revenue, customers that needs to be, who will be the customer, who will be the user, and all these things, and what is the potential effect on health outcomes. So these are the things that you should be looking at, and how you are going to capture the market. So if you look at existing, these are some of the conditions: heart diseases and pulmonary conditions and mental disorders, cancer, hypertension. And these are the statistics of 2008, 2000 and 1987. What is the treatment prevalence? And if you look at what is the amount of spending, that is there in the right hand side, and approximate percentage change in total healthcare spending. So you see that heart disease and pulmonary conditions are the first two, and you also see mental disorders and cancer and hypertension all those things coming up. So this way you can understand what is the amount of spending from the government or amount of spending from the healthcare industry for this specific condition, and that will also enable you to understand how the market is crowded and how you could capture the market. So one of the things that you look at in the healthcare system in terms of the disparities, this is a picture where a patient having an artificial limb which costs about $35 to $40 to manufacture in India, while the same artificial limb in the United States costs about $6,000 to $35,000. So these are the disparities that you look at healthcare that makes innovations happen. So you can make faster, cheaper, easier to use, accessible to solve the gap between the haves and have-nots. So how you could make something that is easily deployable in the low-resource hospitals across India, or something how you could make something which is very innovative, disruptive, that can be used across patients. So this is one example where you look at the cost is very different from what is it in India and what is it in US. So these disparities will something you could look at how you could make something that can be used by the patients who cannot afford solution like this. So something that products that can be developed in India can be exported to United States at a lower cost. That could be a competitive advantage. And in terms of not compromising on the quality and other regulatory aspects. So the other aspect in observation and problem identification is you always look for when you interview a doctor or when you interview a clinician or any other user, you always want to see what are the things that they do in their day-to-day life, and you wanted to find the gaps and the problems which are associated. What are the pain points? So one of the things is that you take two innovators and one innovator is trying to just interview a doctor or a user of what are the problems that he's trying to solve. What are the problems that he's trying to solve, and he's asking questions and he's getting answers for that. But other way to look at is there's other innovator who is going into a emergency ward or a operation theater, and he's just spending time with the doctors to understand the different problems, different day-to-day way of doing the process, medical treatments, and then he's identifying much more inefficiencies and risks and what are the pain points. So the important aspect here is to find that you don't directly get into the interviewing process before you start a problem identification. Rather, you do the observation, you spend time with the doctors in the hospital, and then you document everything, and then you come to conclusions. What are the gaps and problems that you have found? And this will help you to understand the observations, problems, and needs, and come up with some insights on how you could solve those particular unmet clinical need. So innovators must first identify and understand the clinical problems that are associated with the strategic focus. So clinical problems, it could be any kind of a problem that the patient is facing. It could be a diabetes, or it could be some heart problem or a respiratory problem. You need to first understand the whole problem of it. So you need to do your own homework on understanding the particular underlying medical disease. For example, right now we have COVID-19. So if you are developing some solution which is directly for COVID-19, so you should understand how COVID-19 is affecting clinically a patient. You should understand what are the other comorbidities which are involved in the patient's declining the health. Patients, it is making it. What are the treatments which are working? What are the treatments which are not working? So in the case of new pandemics, we have very little data, and every day there's a lot of data that is being published in terms of clinical trials. For example, hydroxychloroquine and other things which are, some say it is working, some say it is not working. So very important to understand the clinical problem, and then you try to see you try to come from a point of development, what works and where is the thin line between what is not working, and that is where the hypothesis where you would wanted to test and test it in a simulator, test it in a closed environment where you could measure the efficacy and safety of the solution, and then you go for a clinical trial after ethics committee approval and regulatory clearances. So if you look at any, this would be the process of development, and fundamentally you'll have to understand the problem and then understand the need, clinical need, and then you design solutions. So observing a specific clinical situation and identifying a problem inherent in that solution and reshaping one's understanding of the problem in a need. So a clinical observation is not a problem. A clinical observation is you try to identify the whole situation, what is happening in the day-to-day operation theater or emergency ward, and then you come to conclusion. Based on the whole observation, you come to a specific conclusions, a specific points. These are the gaps and problems which are occurring in day-to-day life of the hospital, day-to-day life of the patients and the doctors. So the example could be observation: a medical resident in training struggles to intubate a patient in a breathing tube into patient's trachea in an emergency room, leading to a drop in the patient's oxygen level. So for every patient who has some kind of a medical condition, it affects their respiratory process. So when it affects the respiratory process, it also leads to hypoxemia and hypoxia, which is when the blood oxygen saturation levels goes below 92% and 90%, which will lead to mortality of the patient. So you need to have oxygen therapy. So one of the ways that you have oxygen therapy is, but non-invasive ventilation is intubating the patient. When the patient is not responding to non-invasive ventilation, or the patient is completely having a respiratory complication, respiratory failure, and is not able to breathe. And that's where you do the intubation. But the problem is the medical doctors, residents, they struggle to intubate the patient because it is a very skillful way of doing it, intubating. So that is the problem that you could come across in observation. The problem could be for the unskilled practitioner, the time required to successfully place the ET tube, endotracheal tube, in an emergency setting, at least in some cases, and can dramatically impact the outcome of the patient. So it could lead to some complications because the patient has to be resuscitated. If the patient has to be resuscitated, it's a golden time that you need to make sure that you intubate it. You sedate the patient and you intubate the patient and you give the oxygen ventilation. So the need could be way to reduce the time required for unskilled medical practitioner to place an endotracheal tube in an emergency setting. So while conducting observations, so you need to go through this process, identify the guiding questions, what you need to be asking while during the process of clinical immersion. For example, how does a medical care team in a hospital interact with patients who suffer from heart disease? And then you look at different hospital settings where you'll be visiting, like an operation theater or a OT or any other doctor's place where you will be doing the observation. Get the permission to do the observation, and then get the whole team, your team, to do the field visit and then do the recording and observations for the whole day. And then supplement the observation with follow-up with interviews, and then come up with your own documentation. And then analyze the data, and then come to conclusion what is the problems and what is the gaps associated with the existing data that you've got. So you could be visiting some operation theaters, and you could be spending time with the doctors and looking at what is the existing treatment, what is the existing medical equipment, and you'll be understanding the core aspects of the treatment happening, and you'll definitely get some key ideas on what is missing in the whole system, and you'll come up with the new ways to solve the problem in their day-to-day process of treating patient. Indicators for identifying problems that may lead to clinical needs. One of that is from the patient's perspective. You look at if a procedure is taking place, Is the patient having more pain? Is the patient having a significant amount of an injury associated with that? So it could be from a patient's perspective, there is a pain, there is a death associated with the problem, there is a stress associated with the problem. So if I say a pain, if a procedure is a painful to a patient, for example, giving a syringe could be painful. For example, giving taking a blood sample for doing a diagnostics could be a pain. So you look at the patient's perspective, what needs to be changed, what are the problems. And that could be, if you are giving a defibrillator, or if you're giving a CPR, if you're giving a ventilator, if you're giving some kind of a dialysis or any other procedure, will that lead to death of a patient? What are the problems that would lead to death of the patient? So you look at that patient's perspective. Other thing is the stress. So while performing certain kind of a procedure, the patient could come across a lot of stress, and that is an indicator for you to take into consideration to solve the problem of while developing a solution. From a perspective of a provider, say a medical professional, a physician, a pediatrician. A pediatrician is someone who takes care of patients who are in the pediatric age group of children. So a pediatrician could come across certain problems from their point of view. It could be something risk, malfunction, and uncertainty from the point of using the device. So these are some of the ways that you look at how you could innovate, how you can make the device better that solves these particular problems like risk, malfunction, and uncertainty. For example, you could claim that the device that you're developing is much more less risk, 10 times less risk than the existing state-of-the-art device, or it is something much more safer, it doesn't malfunction, or it is very certain that this device can provide certain results. And one of the things right now, if you look at COVID-19, from a patient's perspective, if you're developing something for COVID, from a provider's perspective, so one of the things is that the provider could get exposed to the infection. So you would want to make sure that when you're designing a solution, it is basically it is something which is protecting the patient as well as the provider. So you would be designing solutions according to that. So that is where you look into these aspects of how you would be designing, and these are things that you would be taking into considerations while you're looking at. In terms of the systems perspective, cost and inefficiency. Cost is what is the cost that is associated while developing this, and how you could reduce the cost. It could be a ICU cost, it could be a cost of the device. So how you are going to reduce the cost, and that is where you would be taking into consideration when you're looking at system. And inefficiency. So inefficiency is basically if you're doing the same thing again and again, what kind of things that is something you would want to focus on, how you can reduce the inefficiency. So evaluate the treatment process from the perspective of the patient and the provider and the system when seeking the identifying problems of inefficiency. For example, in what instance patients must be held overnight while they await test results, or when is additional staff is required only for a small part of a procedure. So when you are developing solutions, you want to take into consideration of all three things, which is patient's perspective, provider's perspective, and system's perspective. From the whole process of innovating, you look at these things are primarily very important, which is the process. Set up the observations, and you prepare for the observations, and you conduct observations, you document it, name the problem, you test and refine the problem. For example, you would be finding a problem in our day-to-day life. You would be finding problems such as shortage of ventilators, or lack of testing for COVID-19, or lack of testing for eye diseases, for eye screening. So these are some problems you would come across, and you'd want to develop something faster, easier, cheaper, accessible solution that would disrupt the market. And that's how you do the process of development. And you would want to make sure that the product that you're developing, the medical device, is relevant to the market. So the need statement development will involve certain things, like you look at a problem in two different lenses. So when I say lenses, you would be finding a particular problem, and you would be looking at a way that you would be jumping into a conclusion that, okay, this is the problem and this could be the solution, rather than identifying the whole need, what it is. For example, innovators usually grasp the nature of observed clinical problem statement quickly, and then what they do is, for example, when you're observing some problems in physicians having to do a transecting the sternum of a thorax surgery, a well-intentioned innovator may define a need of a more effective cutting device, because you're doing a surgery and you would want to make sure that you would want to make a better device than the existing device. So this would be a typical way of looking at how a problem is looked at and how a need is identified. But the other way is, if someone who is looking into a different way of looking into different lenses, like going one step back and looking the overview of the problem and looking at a need for a way to access the chest to perform procedures on organs of the thorax. So that is a different way where the options for innovative solutions can be much more broader. So you are not basically now narrowed your problem, and you have basically increased the your way of looking at things, and your made the solutions is much more broader, so that the possibilities of developing a solutions which solves a wider problem. So for example, if I am saying that I would want to make a ventilator that is solving a particular patient's clinical need, be it COVID, I'm developing something for COVID. But if I look at a problem that is for the entire particular patient age group, and you're looking at different conditions, so I could come up with a solution that would solve for COVID, as well as it could be solving for the entire other medical conditions. So if you just focus on COVID, you are just sticking to the specific methodologies and specific guidelines. But if you make your solutions broader enough, then you're making something which is much more solving different audiences and different problems, and it could be much more accessible for other scenarios. So fundamentally, you need to understand the method. The method could be different ways, and how you choose to solve the problem, and what are the different problems that you identified, and how you are developing the problem is all that it takes. For example, method to prevent hip dislocation of a high-risk patients, method to prevent recurrent hip dislocation in high-risk patients, a method to prevent recurrent hip dislocation in patients after surgical treatment of a first hip dislocation. So these are different ways that you look at, and where you choose the problem that you would identify by speaking with doctors, and by speaking with the clinicians, you would identify what specifically that you would wanted to focus on, and how you're going to develop the solutions for that. In developing a need statement, it is necessary to carefully choose every single word, so that you don't change the design based on a wrong direction towards the need statement that is being done. So innovators has to understand the whole process of doing a specific experiment and figuring out things, and at the same time you need to keep your need statement as broad as possible, so that it is solving a wider range of problem. So common changes in outcomes and how they are measured in need statements. So some of the things is like necessary change. What are the things that are measured by? So if you look at improved clinical efficacy, it means that treatment success rate in clinical trials. For, say, if there is a treatment for malaria, or if there is a treatment for pneumonia, and there are two different drugs, and they are doing a random control trial, randomized control trial. So you can see what is which drug is much more effective, safer than the other drug. So they do two patient clinical trials, and they find out which particular medical device or drug is much more there's improved efficacy. So that are things that you look at: improved clinical efficacy and increased patient safety, which is basically the rate of adverse events in clinical trials, and reduced cost, and improved physician productivity, facility, and improved physician ease of use, improved patient convenience, and accelerated patient recovery. So some of the things which you need to look into it when you're developing a medical device as part of the need statement, and what are the things that you would be coming across. So if you are choosing something, so you will have to make sure that the product is going to market, and you are looking at what are the things that it takes for you to take into consideration in the process of development. So in need criteria, you are basically crafting the whole solution, crafting the whole need statement based on the specific criteria which I have mentioned. Detailed information that is supported its creation can be found to take into consideration before it is meeting the specific solution. For example, for the need to reduce the incidence of urinary tract infection in ICU patients, the need criteria that might include whatever the solution may be, it needs to be deployed by a personnel that is already available within the ICU, and that has at least it takes 2 weeks since the average patients can use it, and it is not something redundant. So the cost also comes into place. So the cost of the solution should be comparable to the cost of the traditional catheters, and it should also be much more safer to use. So you should take into consideration the existing state of the art. Is it different, or is it safer? Is it cost-wise? Is it better than, or is it equivalent to it? And if you look at the translation from an idea to a product development to a market commercialization, so different stages you would go through, and each stage is very important for you to shape your product and make it better. So the process that you are looking at is translating problem into a need statement, and then you are making sure that the need statement is accurate and against the problem, and then you're confirming that needs, and then you are validating the need, and then you're validating the need, and then you're developing the problem. So you're basically categorizing. So that's why you come up with the prototypes, and then because the prototype is actually going to be tested, and then you're validating it, and then taking it to a alpha beta prototype. So need screening has different steps to it. One of the things is disease state fundamentals, treatment options, stakeholder analysis, and market analysis and need filtering. If I look at disease state fundamental, so you would be looking at what are the things that what are the medical conditions that you are looking at trying to solve, or what are the problems that you're looking at, and how well are you equipped. So it is very important when you're developing a medical device, you involve a doctor in your core team. So the doctor who is solving that particular problem, who's part of your team, has the domain expertise, can give you inputs for you to rigorously test it and iterate it such that it meets the requirement of the market. And so if you look at the screening, so you look at the process of screening, you try to take it something which is much more easier to do. You try to take something which is something it must have, and something what are the things that is nice to have. So with a detailed specification of the need, including anatomy, physiology, pathology, epidemiology, and market dynamics, and competitors and current solutions, you should look at what must have and what is nice to have in every product that you're developing in the medical device. And for example, at the heart of the need specification is a need statement, which is a single sentence focusing on a goal or the endpoint, not the problem. And example can be a simple, safe mechanism to reduce the frequency of stress urinary continuous in elderly women. So disease state fundamentals, like I said, you should know the problems, you should know the particular field that you're choosing in terms of the medical domain that you're looking at, be it something related to heart diseases, something related to pulmonary, respiratory, or other medical conditions. So you should completely understand you should have the domain knowledge. So you should do your own R&D and homework before you're working on that. So that is disease state fundamentals. You know the fundamentals, essential parts of the innovation process. So you can apply the knowledge to develop something which is innovative. So understanding the disease state will involve you to do research on anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology, symptoms, outcomes, epidemiology, and economic impact of the disease. For example, if you look at India is something which has the most number of blind people around the world, and you could calculate the amount of blind people in India could what is the amount of economic loss to the country if those blind people are actually are not blind. You could look at how much of jobs that they could create, or they could have a job, or support to the families associated with them, and how could make the country. So those are the economic state, how much of impact that a particular disease can have on a country. Similarly, like COVID, we have COVID right now, and the whole economic situation is bad. So any particular disease will have an impact on the economy. So you should look into that aspect. So that where you see how you could make solutions that has an impact, and that is one thing that you would be looking at when you're looking at disease state fundamentals. And you should have a knowledge about it. And when you look at the disease state fundamentals, you would be looking at a specific way of approach where you would wanted to know how the lungs work, or how the heart works, or what is the, if there is a specific disease, what are the normal anatomy, what is the if it is a chest x-rays, how does a normal chest x-ray looks, or how does a patient with pneumonia chest x-rays looks. And you would want to understand the clinical presentation, and what is the procedure which takes place, and what is the outcomes of it, different outcomes, and what is the prevalence of the disease, epidemiology in the population. That's one of the things is like blindness and visual impairment, or respiratory infections, malaria, diabetes, and so on. So what is the economic impact in the whole system? So one of the things you would start looking at is heart diseases, and you would want to first understand how the heart works, what is the electrical activity of a heart. And so to treatment options, so the second thing that you look at is you understand the whole fundamentals of the disease of the particular medical condition. You also look at what is the treatment options available, so how you can improve the treatment. So if you are looking at areas of improvement, areas of gaps, you would want to see what is the available therapies, and what is the therapies which they use for an experimental basis, and what are the things that they could significantly improve upon. So those are the things that you would want to understand. Understanding the clinical and patient requirements will help you to innovate while developing medical devices. So the treatment options fundamentals, you look at the current gaps associated, what are the unique solutions that you can bring into a system. Where there is a gap, could be a patient being transported from a place. For example, accidents are such a big problem. So the problem can be patients who's affected by this trauma from this particular emergency accident, and how are they being transported from nearest ambulances to what is the time, what is the these are some of the examples that you look at how you could solve a problem. So something which is some problem which is persisting, which is there in the day-to-day patient's life, day-to-day the country that is having this problem, and how you could build solutions for that particular problems. That is the patient dynamics that you would be looking at. And these are the gaps that you would be trying to modify and improve based on the technologies that you will be building on, and something which can solve. The types of treatment options, it could be something an open surgery. You could be developing some solution which would have something to do with the surgeries, or something which has to do something non-invasive or very minimally invasive treatments, or energy based, something like a ultrasound or a radiation, or something behavioral, which is something like apps that you see at Fitbit band and all those things. And pharmacology is something that you give a medicine and you try to do that. So these are some of the options, treatment options, and different types of treatment gaps. So if you look at the treatment gaps which are associated, and you could look at the existing dialysis machine, or existing machines. There's a machine called ECMO, which is basically taking blood from patient, and it is oxygenating, and then it is sending back the blood. So you could look at any problems from that. Basically, you could say that the blood clotting is a problem. So you could come up with some solution which would solve the problem of blood clotting, or you could come up with solution which is solving the problem of the expensive nature of the product which is already there at the market. You could be coming up with an alternative for that existing problem associated with that particular machine. So there are different ways to look at what are the treatments, and in terms of the treatment gaps, so the gaps between the desired treatment outcomes and the outcomes achieved by the existing or emerging treatments. So that is one treatment gap. Another treatment gap between a particular stage of a disease and an existing solution. And if you look at stakeholder analysis, the innovator systematically examines the direct and indirect interactions of the parties involved in terms of the stakeholder, like what is the financing that is required and what is the delivery of the care. And the purpose of this analysis is to understand how these entities are affected by the need, and determine their required how we address the solutions. I'm going to go to some of the main slides in the interest of time. So stakeholder analysis, if you look at any medical need, so these are the different stakeholders. It could be a private player, hospitals, government, patients advocacy group, physicians, nurses, healthcare facilities, professional associations, and other trade facilities. So you would want to make sure that all these stakeholders are taken into consideration when you are developing a medical device. It can be so the product that you are developing has to satisfy all these criteria, all these fundamentals, so that you are successful while you are launching the product, and it is something it's having a huge impact. Cycle of care analysis for renal diseases. So if you look at a renal disease, this is the whole cycle how a patient would go through. A patient would initially develop certain symptoms, and then visits the hospital, PCP, and then the PCP orders a lab test, and the lab test is being reviewed and confirmed, diagnostics, and the patient is referred to a nephrologist, and then the nephrologist does the patient is referred to a dialysis clinic, and then the patient undergoes the treatment option. Say if the patient doesn't go through the symptoms, and if the patient doesn't act on the symptoms, and the patient could go, patient's condition could become very severe, and it can directly lead to the emergency, which is what the chart looks like. The patient is taken direct to the emergency. For every disease, these kind of procedure, these kind of steps are looked at. So it could be an emergency care, it could be a cardiac disease, or any kind of a disease, diabetes. So you would want to make sure that at least the symptoms, you would want to make sure your innovation is going into the every aspect of the patient's journey. So you could be developing something in the screening side, or you could be developing something in the diagnostic side, something in the therapeutic side, something monitoring and managing the patient. So it would fall into these criteria for any medical condition. So the market analysis, you look at without a compelling and market you wouldn't want to develop something which doesn't have a market. So you would want to make sure that there is a huge market for it, and you develop something that is solving that particular problem, and it is the buyers are there for the product that you're developing. Otherwise, the product that you have developed might be very good, but it doesn't have any buyers. So that would be a scenario where a lot of the innovators develop a solution, but it is not being accepted to the market because the problem, you have not taken into consideration of the market dynamics. You have not done the enough research on the particular market needs. So you would want to make sure that there is enough market for that. So let me just go through the ways that you look at performing market analysis. So if you look at any particular market, you would want to make sure that you do the market segmentation, and you do the market size analysis, and then the market dynamics, market needs, willingness to pay, and the target market. So the questions that you need to ask is, if you do the market segmentation, so it could be a different age group of customers that you're looking at, and the patient characteristics and the attributes, that could be a market segmentation. And the market size is basically you look at the entire spending of the particular that market. What is the government spending, what is the private sector spending, and how much is the potential for growth in the next 5-10 years. So market dynamics is the competition, and the market needs is the what are the needs of the customer within the segment for the existing solution. How are you going to meet those market needs, and who are the payers? Is it the government, or is it the private hospitals, NGOs, or is it the foundations, or is it some other organization who's willing to pay for the product? So these are things that you need to look into while developing medical device in terms of the market analysis. So market segments, you can look at market size, the patient, and what is the amount of growth, and what is the accessibility of the market, the potential for reimbursement, ability to charge. And the market dynamics could be the what is the competitors, and what are the revenues, and what are the existing gaps, and what are the strengths and weaknesses, what are the regulatory conditions, and all these things. Market needs are much more to do with the patients and caretakers, what are the gaps associated with that, and the extent to which needs are being met by existing treatments, and who are paying. These are the things that you need to look at while you're developing medical device. Essentially, when you're investing a lot of money into the product development, and you would want to make sure that the product is successful, and you completely know the picture of what it takes to develop a medical device. And indicators to identify favorable market. And I would say that you look at the key aspects of the pricing, and you look at the aspect of ability for the product to meet the market need, the existence of a need, and is it something, a market which has already been captured, or is it there is a room for more innovations, and something that you could deploy, you could stand out from the pool of competitors. So need filtering, I would essentially explain you that need filtering has to be done in a certain way, that based on certain criteria about patient impact. So when you're looking at a different, you have visited 100 hospitals, and you have got different problem statements and need statements, and you are filtering the needs. And when you are filtering the needs, you would basically look at the kind of a rating that you give for each one. So based on the highest rating, that you would want to filter those ones, and you would want to have the ones which have maximum impact. For example, the maximum impact in this case is addressing a need of a life of a patient. It could be something that a solution, a simple solution, which is basically life-saving. The second most important thing could be addressing the need of would reduce the morbidity. For example, we have developed a solution which would reduce the morbidity in the existing ventilation process. So that is a huge need that you would want to select while you're comparing with other needs. So the next level would be addressing the need to reduce and eliminate undesirable symptoms. For example, you are doing a procedure, and it has an adverse effects. and you would want to make sure that you would not do that. Rather, you would develop something which would have an less adverse effects or undesirable symptoms, but not have an impact on the morbidity and quality of life. So the other way of looking at is addressing the need would be convenient of the patient, but not have an impact. And similarly, the next is addressing the need would not have an impact on patient. So that is the patient impact, and the treatment impact is there are no existing treatments available, and that would be your highest rating for that. And the second option is there are no existing treatments available to address the need, but numerous inventors companies have already tried to address the need and failed. And the other thing is there are solutions, there are treatment exists to address, but have serious deficiencies that must overcome. And the last is the treatment treatment exists to address the need but have a minor deficiencies. And you could find the last rating as treatment exists, and you're just again developing something for the wider population. So you would want to make sure that you have a impactful product. You have a product which is much more something acceptable. So you'll from the treatment landscape, you will always want to make sure that you are developing something that is no other treatment available, or something totally different, rather than an incremental improvements. So from the perspective of rating innovating product and sample rating, a scale of a subjective factor, need must be life-saving. So you could look at different problems and need statements, and you'd finding the particular problems, and in a way, and a need can be, you want to make sure that a need to solve a problem which is causing deaths, a problem which is a need to solve something that would have an impact on the patients. So these are some of the ratings that you would see. Without addressing the need, patients will face likelihood of death. So I'll be happy to share the slides, and I'll be able to look into some of these ratings. And these are some of the ideation and brainstorming concept generations that you would go through when you're innovating a medical device. And I'll quickly run through specific concepts which are fundamentally very relevant to the market. And let me explain you what it means to come up with a brainstorming. So you're working with a group, and the group can be having a different domain experts, and you do a brainstorming. And then when you do a brainstorming, you would come to a solution that you would come to a narrow down to a designing a solution that would have that would eventually lead to a prototyping and product development. Similarly, concept generations. Fundamentally, when you look at concept generation, you should be looking at the intellectual property, and then regulatory and business models, prototyping, and final concept selections. And I would be touching upon a few things such as medical devices from the point of regulatory, class 1, class 2, class 3 medical devices. Class 1 medical devices can be bandages, and class 2 medical devices can be X-ray machines, and class 3 medical devices can be the high risk devices. So the classification of medical devices are such that it is the safety and the risk of the usage of the device. That's how it is classified, a medical device. And some of the regulatory pathways for FDA are device exemption and 510(k), and pre-market approvals. So 510(k) is basically something which is already similarly available, and you are making an improvements on that. Device exemption is basically you are something which is very low risk. It doesn't require much of a regulatory clearance. And pre-market approval is you are going through a stringent pathway for that. And these are European device classes for medical devices, the US equivalent, and the CE certification which is involved. So these are some of the business models. I would leave it here. So these are some of the basics on medical device, the process of medical device innovation. So where you would be fundamentally looking at what are the ways to identify a specific problem statement and developing a need statement and doing an analysis, screening, and then you're designing solutions for that. So I'll be happy to take any questions in this session, and feel free to reach out to me.
So Gautham?
Yes.
Harish?
We have some questions. It is from one of the participants, Dr. Thirumalai Chami. The question is it completely reliable regarding interface between devices and information system?
Can you repeat the question?
The question is it completely reliable regarding interface between devices and information system?
Yeah, so this is for medical devices. A medical device can be right now a software could be a medical device, or a hardware could be a medical device. But in terms of the treatment options that we are looking at, something a hardware device or a software which does automation such as X-rays or a lung models or a liver models. So medical device also classifies into a software as well, but mostly we are looking at hardware, and the software can be the part of the hardware. And information system, yes. So it does fall into picture when we're talking about telemedicine, when we're talking about using the information system to solve a particular clinical need, medical need. For example, we are looking at one of the examples is tele ICU. So you're using in an ICU, you're looking at patients at different parameters like heart rate, respiratory rate, and their blood oxygen saturation levels. So if you're looking at a market like India, and there are a lot of patients in the villages and across very remotely, they are present in very remote areas. So if you are developing some solution which can be reached to the last mile, can be reached to the villages, poorest of the poor, with the information technology like telemedicine, tele-ICU, you are solving a problem which was doctors are not accessible to those, but they can monitor, manage, and help from the remote location. Yeah, that applies.
So I think the participant would have solved the particular answer question. We have another question from participant. What about developing medical devices at nanoscale level? Hello, Gautham?
Yes.
Nanoscale level, developing medical devices at nanoscale.
So medical devices. So if you're looking at medical devices, we're talking about device that is solving a particular clinical need, unmet clinical need, and it is having an impact. So nanoscale level. So then it is a totally different aspect. You are making a solution that is something related to therapeutics. So you could definitely follow this process involved for developing a medical device, but you need to understand that if you are making a nanoscale level, it becomes much more into an R&D phase. It becomes a very R&D, intensive, and it takes a lot of effort to prove your hypothesis, to publish some research papers, do the efficacy, and it will take a lot of time. I am assuming what you're referring to is something. Medicine need. So it will take it more of time, but there is definitely you definitely want to make sure you would follow these design thinking principles, you follow these particular process of innovating the understanding needs. So rather than jumping into a particular technology, you would first want to make sure that there is a relevant clinical need, there is a relevant market opportunity, there's relevant expertise involved, and then come to a conclusion whether this particular technology or a nanoscale nanotechnology is relevant for them. So yeah.
So I think that question would have been answered. Nanoscale level. And another question: what will be the role of these devices with IoT? Or role of IoT in medical devices?
Sure. So role of IoT, for example, there is a huge opportunity for IoT actually. If you look at IoT, I would give you an example. You have uh, you have patients who are having going through the labor process. Pregnant women who are going through the labor process, and they have to be continuously monitored. So there is some innovations which are basically a wearable, and this wearable is continuously monitoring the uterine contraction. It is monitoring the fetal heart rate. It is monitoring the other parameters of the patient, and it is sending the all the variables to the nearby hospital, or it is sending to the cloud, and the patient caretakers can monitor it, the doctors can monitor it, the gynecologist can monitor it, and there is a huge opportunity for IoT. There are already products which are in market, which is creating a lot of impact, I would say. So all these vitals that you look at, you could look at the Apple Watch. So Apple Watch is an example for IoT. It's taking all the vitals and it is sending into cloud, and you can look at it in your dashboard. Similarly, there are huge opportunities for IoT for different medical conditions, for different problems. Yes.
So Gautam, I think these are the questions available. So if any other participants they have any questions, it can be asked, or it can be directly asked in the profile available. We have shared the LinkedIn profile of the presenter, so you can able to ask some queries or doubts through that particular LinkedIn profile. So Gautam, thanks for answering the questions. Now I hand over the session to Dr. Paul, the HOD of the department.
Hi, Gautam. Uh, Great pleasure to be to discussing a particular topic with you. I think your presentation is very good. I'm proud to have a student like this. Definitely, you must reach the top level. Your company profile should be grown like this. It will be the great opportunity to meet a person like you. Thank you. After the college, please come to college for visiting and interact with our students so that our students will get some motivation from you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Gautam.
Thank you.
And all the participants, thank you for participating in the webinar.
Harish,
Thank
feedback.
you.
Feedback. Harish?
It has been shared, sir.
Harish, feedback கொடுத்துட்டீங்களா?
It has been shared, sir, in the YouTube link.
Okay, okay. இல்ல நான்
So I thank all the participants. So we expect you to cooperate for the webinars to come. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all. Thank you all participants. Thank you.